Hi there, welcome to Baking with Bryan Live. We are here live on a Sunday afternoon. Hope everybody's having a good afternoon. Everybody had a good week last week and onward to another excellent week. Today we are tackling something new and different and something that we haven't done yet. We're talking about yeast doughs today. I've kind of stayed away from doing yeast doughs on the show. Because they're a little different. They take a little bit more time, they're a little bit more difficult, and I had to get some things figured out with it. So I did, and we're here, and we're making a chocolate babka, which is a traditional Eastern European Jewish baked item. Traditionally, it's made with like leftover challah dough from when you're making challah on Sabbath, Friday night. You take the leftover sweet challah dough, roll it out, put some chocolate filling in it, roll it up, bake it, and it's this really, really delicious, great for brunch. It's kind of like a Danish, but it's really, really good. So we're going to be making that today, and I'm very excited. Making yeast doughs, breads, sweet doughs, Danish shouldn't really be something that is too intimidating. They're pretty straightforward and basic. When you start getting into sourdoughs, then it can get a little bit more difficult and a little bit more involved. But a straightforward yeast dough is basically 4 or 5 ingredients. You have the flour, the yeast, water, salt, and sugar, and any additional flavorings or anything you add to it. So we're going to talk about all those different ingredients as we make our dough. I'm going to make the dough so you guys can see the whole process of making the dough. It's kind of like if you've ever made a brioche, which is a really enriched dough. It's got a lot of butter in it. That's the kind of the dough that we're making here for this dish, for this item. And then I have some dough ready to show you how to roll it out, and we're going to fill it, and then we roll it, and it gets a special twist. Goes in the pan, proofs again, and then it gets baked, and it's really, really delicious. So I'm going to start a little bit backwards. I'm going to start with showing you the proofed dough. Rolled out, spread it. Let me actually just check my filling. Chocolate filling. And so I want to do that first so that I can show you guys how it looks when it's proofed right before it goes into the oven to bake, because it does have to proof for a second time once it's in the pan. Enough talking. We're going to get started with what we're doing. So the first thing I want to do is get my pan prepared. So we're using a loaf pan for this. I believe this is a 10-inch. This is a almost 10.5 inch by 5.5 by 2 3/4 inch loaf pan. Available, I'm sure, on Amazon. I think like stores like Sur La Table and Williams Sonoma have them as well. Excuse me. This loaf pan is a little bit more hardy than a traditional one that you would get at like Walmart or something. It's got rolled edges, which gives a lot more support, and it's a folded metal on the end here, which also gives a little bit more support and can handle a little bit heavier doughs. So I'm going to prepare the pan by spraying it with our favorite non-stick spray, pan for baking. You could use butter. You could just smear butter in the pan, but I love this product so much. So that's going to keep it from sticking to the pan. You always want to have your pan ready to go before you start. You want to have a clean work surface because we're going to be working on right on the table. I'm going to be using some red flour to dust the work surface so the dough doesn't stick. I have the dough, so I mixed this dough earlier, and it proofs for about an hour in a warm place. So I put it. You want it to double. It could take up to an hour, but you're really looking for it to double in size. And we'll get to that when I make the dough. I'll show you what I mean by that. But I just put it in my oven, and then I put a sheet pan of hot water underneath of it to create steam and heat, just enough heat in the oven so that it rises. Because essentially the yeast is a living organism, and it's feeding off of the sugar that's in the dough. And the byproduct of the yeast feeding is carbon dioxide, which creates bubbles in the dough, which is our lift, and that's our leavening. So it's actually both a mechanical and a chemical leavener, yeast. So this is our dough. We're going to flour our work surface. It's got a little bit of wet. It was a little steamy in that oven. So we're going to flour our work surface with a little bit of flour. It doesn't take very much. And I always like to put a little bit of flour on the dough as well. And then we have our bowl scraper, which we've used before. And we're going to knock down, so the dough got nice and puffed up. We're going to knock it down. We're going to take all that air out of it. Take it out. It's a really, really soft dough. So it actually does not need a rolling pin. You can see I can just push it out with my hands. We're going for a rectangle. We're going for about a 16-inch rectangle. Put a little bit of flour on top just so it doesn't stick too much. But essentially it's so soft and warm and buttery that we can just push it out to the size that we need. And that is what we're looking for. It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't want to make sure that you don't have too thin. You don't get it. Sorry about that. You want to make sure you don't get it too thin. So that's pretty good. Doesn't have to be perfect. Then we're going to take our chocolate filling, which I'm also going to show you how to make. It's bittersweet chocolate, butter, and sugar. Brown sugar and equal parts of brown sugar and white sugar. You just melt it all together, and it makes this beautiful paste. And we're going to spread that paste evenly on the dough. It's a little warm, but it's not bad. Nice and soft. So I'm just going to dollop it on for now, and then I'm going to grab a spatula and smear it across. You can use semi-sweet chocolate. I like bittersweet chocolate. You get a really rich chocolate flavor with that. And there's that. Don't want that one big globule on it. So we're just gonna pretty evenly disperse the filling, and then we're gonna get our spatula. I'm using a mini offset spatula here. Works really well. And then we're just gonna, as best we can, again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but as best we can, just kind of smear out the chocolate filling. Once this goes in the oven, the chocolate filling is gonna melt. The sugars in the filling is gonna melt, and so it'll kind of even itself out. Obviously you want to get it pretty even as you can. But you see, it doesn't really matter if you have little holes or stuff like that in there, because that just means that that one person is going to have a big piece of chocolate in it. So that's pretty much all I'm going to do. You can really fill this with anything. It doesn't have to be chocolate. You can make a raspberry babka and just spread raspberry jam in there. You can put pecans in it. You could do just like a cinnamon, sugar, and pecan roll in it. It's pretty versatile. It's pretty much whatever you want to do. I just happen to be making chocolate this time. So next, we're going to roll it up. So we're starting at the end that's closest to ourselves. And we just pick up the edge just a little bit and fold it over just to get it started rolling. You want to roll as evenly as you can. And you just keep on going, picking up the edge, rolling over until you get enough that you can just start to push it. Just like you were making cinnamon rolls. Do you want the filling to the edge or leave a margin? I like to leave a little bit of a margin, and I'll show you why in a minute. Doesn't really matter if it goes all the way to the edge, because after the next step, you'll see why. So that's it. You just keep it rolled up just like that, and then you take a knife. We're going to cut it down the center. And you want to expose those chocolatey layers. So essentially we've made a chocolate cinnamon roll, is really what we got here. So we're going to take that, you're going to pinch the ends together, not too tightly, just pinch them together. And then we're going to twist it. And what this is going to do, it's going to create a really nice marble chocolate vein down the center of the dough. And the ends, we're just going to kind of roll the ends under to make it a little cleaner looking. And that essentially, take our pan, greased pan, lay your dough right in the pan, and that is it. And we're going to take an egg wash, one egg yolk, and a little bit of heavy cream or milk. And we're going to heavily brush it with an egg wash. This is going to do two things. It's going to give it a nice golden brown shine on top when it bakes. It's also going to help stick our streusel topping on top. So we got that. And then we're going to take our streusel topping, which is flour, confectioner's sugar, and butter, and a little bit of cinnamon. We just pulsed it in the food processor until it got crumbly texture. And we're going to sprinkle a couple handfuls of that on. You want to be very generous with this. You want to have a nice, really nice thick layer of streusel topping on top. And it's okay if it goes on the edge. I'm actually going to cover the entire babka with it, because it bakes and makes this really crispy, crunchy, crumbly topping on the edge and on top. So we're going to cover that, and that is it. And then this goes back into our warm oven, and this is going to proof for about 20 to 30 more minutes, and it's going to rise up really, really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the warm oven. Okay, Google, set a timer for 20 minutes.
All right, 20 minutes. Starting now.
And now I'm going to show you how to actually make the dough. So, we have all of our ingredients here. Make a little room. First thing we have to do is we have to warm up our milk. We have to wake up the yeast. It's called active dry yeast, so I'll show you a little bit of it here. You can show it on the overhead camera if you've never used yeast before. It's these little pellets of yeast, and it's a live living organism in there. It's alive, and I'll show you how we know it's alive, because we're gonna proof it, or we're gonna prove it, make it prove itself. So we're gonna warm up some milk. I have a half a cup of whole milk. We're gonna put it in the microwave for about 35 seconds. We're going to microwave that. Grab a spoon. To that, we're going to add our yeast. We have 4.7 grams of yeast. or about 1 teaspoon. I'm sorry, 1 tablespoon. About 1 tablespoon of yeast. You could refrigerate it. You could make it. So if you wanted to refrigerate it and bake it later, I would get it to the stage it's at now before you proof it in the pan. Put it in the fridge. I wouldn't hold it any longer than overnight. Pull it back out and put it in your warm oven to proof. Whenever you're ready to bake it, let it proof. You probably have to let it proof for about 45 minutes. When you bring it back out of the fridge, it's going to take a little longer. That's nice and warm. But you can make it ahead of time. Let it sit overnight in the fridge, bring it out and proof it, and then throw it in the oven and bake it, if you wanted. So our milk is warm. You want it to feel warm to the touch. You don't want it to be boiling. You don't want it to be steaming because that'll kill the yeast. And we're going to take a pinch of sugar. So literally a pinch. Put that in. And that's going to really jumpstart and feed the yeast. And we're going to sprinkle our dry yeast on top. And then give it a little stir. And then we're just going to set it to the side for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then you're going to see, I can already start smelling it. You're going to see that it is going to start to bubble and foam up. And that's how we know that it's alive and well and working. And that it's going to work in your bread or in your dough. So we're just going to let that sit. While that's sitting, we're going to come over to our mixer. And we're going to put our sugar. I have our sugar and our salt in here. We're going to put our egg. So this is an enriched dough, like a brioche or a challah, so it has eggs and butter in it, as opposed to just being a straightforward dough where it would just have flour, water, sugar, yeast, and salt. So I have an egg yolk, I have a 1/4 cup of sugar, and 1/3 of a teaspoon of salt in there. I'm going to mix it up. Just a little bit, because the dough hook, we're using a dough hook for this recipe. Let me show you that. And that is used to knead doughs. So if you're making bread dough or something and you need to knead it, use your dough hook instead of the paddle. Works better for that. But the dough hook does not reach all the way down to the bottom of the bowl. So I do need to give this a little mix before I add anything else to it. Just like that. Just simple as that. And then to that we're going to add, so you can see it's starting to bubble. That quick. It's starting to foam and bubble. So I know it's good. And we can go ahead and put that into our eggs and sugar mix. Pour that right in. And then we're going to put all of our flour in at once. I'm using a combination of bread flour and all-purpose flour. Bread flour is a high gluten flour, and where is the bag? I use King Arthur bread flour. It's a high gluten flour. Whenever you're making dough, what gives bread dough is its elasticity. It's called gluten. It's a protein in the dough. And with this, you want there to be a high gluten flour in it because we're adding fat. It gets really, really involved. Essentially, there are strands of gluten in the dough. When you add fat to them, the fat coats those strands of gluten, and you can't work them enough anymore once they're coated with the fat to make your dough nice and chewy. So you actually want to produce the gluten first before you add the butter or fat into it. So that's what we're going to do. We're putting the flour in to the mixer first, and we're going to mix it up and produce all of that good gluten before we add our soft butter to it. So I'm going to turn the mixer on. It's going to get a little noisy. And the mixer is going to be running for a few minutes as the dough mixes. You can watch it as it goes. You'll see it start to form. So hopefully you can still hear me while this is running. But you can see the dough is starting to form on the dough hook. And we're going to let that run until the dough completely forms. And then it's going to do what's called clearing the bowl, where the dough is going to start cleaning itself off of the bowl. You'll see it happen. So you can see the dough has formed a ball onto the hook, and the bowl is fairly clean. So that we know the gluten has started to be produced, and it's actually not very sticky. The dough, it's a soft dough, but it's not sticky. Like, you don't need flour to keep it from sticking to your hands. You can see it's a really, really soft dough, and it's got a good stretch. We'll get more of a stretch once we mix it more and add the butter in. So before I turn the mixer back on, I'm going to slowly add the butter, because you kind of want the butter to emulsify in the dough. It's a room temperature soft butter, and we're slowly going to add bits of it into it. We're going to let the dough mix the butter in completely before we add the next bit into it. Once all the butter is added into it, we are still going to keep the mixer running, and it's going to keep producing more gluten and kneading the dough. We're going to listen for a slapping sound, and that's how you know when the dough is ready. So we got all of our butter in. And then we're just going to let this mix. It's going to get a little violent. It's going to get a little loud. And it's definitely going to give the mixer a good workout. But you can see that the dough has started to stick to the walls of the bowl again. So we need to keep mixing it until that gluten forms enough that it pulls itself away from the bowl. Which it's getting there. And you can start to hear the slapping sound. So that's pretty good. That's just about got it. There's a little bit of butter and dough on the edge, which I'm going to get down into it. Give it another mix. The dough is really silky soft and light. Alright. When you're making brioche dough, you mix it for a lot longer than this, and you use all bread flour. And then you do something called a window test, which I'm going to try and do and show you. Essentially, you stretch the dough to make sure it's got enough gluten built up. You stretch the dough until you can see light through it, and then you know that you've gotten to the window. You've passed your window test. So, get my bowl scraper again. We're going to get the dough out of the bowl. Might not look like much now, but as you saw before, it really rises up to the occasion. So there's our dough. Pretty straightforward, if I do say so myself. So the window test is, you can see that you can start to see light through the dough before it starts to tear. So that's pretty good. If you were making brioche, we would work it a little bit more. There's no really need to knead it. At this point, the machine has pretty much done all the kneading that we needed to do. It's a really soft, you can see how soft it is. Not sticky. Obviously, I don't need to put any flour on my hands, and it's not sticking to my hands. So this, you put into a greased bowl, which we had before. And you saw when we pulled it out before, it went from this little bit, it came up to about 3/4 of the way of the bowl once it was proofed. You're going to let it proof for about an hour. Again, you're looking for more of it to be double in size than you are the amount of time that it proofs for. I'm going to wrap it tightly with some plastic wrap. You want to put it in a warm, non-drafty place in your kitchen to proof. Like I said, I use my oven, and I just put a little sheet pan. I actually use a quarter sheet pan. Pour some boiling water in it, and I just stick that underneath of the dough, and that creates a nice, warm, humid environment for the dough to rise in. So I got that all wrapped tightly. We're wrapping it so that it doesn't dry out and it doesn't form a skin on it. Proofing, as I said, proofing is the process by which the yeast is pretty much feeding on the sugar in the dough, creating carbon dioxide, which is what causes the bubbles in the dough and creates the rise in the dough. So when you proof, you're just letting the dough rest, and the yeast is feeding on the sugars in the dough and creating the carbon dioxide bubbles for the rise in the dough. So this hasn't gotten terribly big, but it has grown a little bit. You can see it's grown a little bit since we last put it in there. It probably needs to go for about 10 or 15 more minutes before we bake it. It's going to come up almost to the top, not quite to the top of the pan before you bake it. You do the double proof so that you get a nice lift when you bake it. So you do a bulk ferment or bulk proof, which is what we're doing the first time. Then you shape the dough, put it into the pan. You do a second proof, which is what we're doing in the pan the second time. That gives it its final lift before you put it into the oven and bake it for the baking, which gives it its third lift when the gas bubbles expand and puff up the dough. So after all of that, through the magic of television, as always, I present to you, we'll call it Bubby's Chocolate Babka. This is the final product. As you can see, it got a really nice rise, a really nice lift. It's got a golden brown, shiny golden brown crust on top. It took about 40 to 45 minutes to bake completely through. And well, I'm going to cut into it and you're going to see the nice swirl of chocolate in it. You got the crunchies on the top from the streusel, but then you also have some on the side, which I really like. The ones on the side are really good. You can even sprinkle some of the streusel in the middle of the dough before you roll it up. But we did not do that, but you can. So I'm going to slice this bad boy open because it smells incredible. For the past couple hours, it smelled really amazing in this house. So like I said, it's really good for a brunch. Really good on Shabbat, on Sabbath. A really good dessert. It's really, really light. And you can see chocolate, it's actually still a little warm in the middle, which is why it's slicing a little rough. But you can see there's nice swirls of chocolate in there. There you go. And that is chocolate babka. So you can see, made a little bit of a mess. You got your nice swirls of dough. The bread dough is baked pretty perfectly. You can tell it's done by when you press on it in the oven. It bounces back, it gives back. If you press on it and it kind of sinks down, it's not done yet, it's still raw in the middle. But if you press on it and it bounces back, it's done. With breads, you can actually take the bread out of the pan, turn it over, and give it a knock. And if it sounds hollow on the inside, then it's done. But that doesn't really work really well with this dough. You could use a skewer. You can put a skewer into it too, and if the skewer comes out clean, then you're good to go. But I usually go for the spring test, and you got a really nice dark golden brown color on top. This was baked at 325 for about 45 minutes in the oven. I will post the recipe. I just didn't get around to it this week. It was a little busy, hectic. I will post it as soon as we go off stream, off live. I'll post it for you guys. Really easy to do, really delicious and quite impressive result. Chocolate babka. Basic yeast dough, enriched yeast dough, bittersweet chocolate filling, and the nice crumbly streusel on top. So, I have to taste some just to make sure it's as good as it looks and smells. Just as good as it looks and smells. So, excuse me. With that, I bid you adieu. Hope you enjoyed this episode. I will let you know next week what we will be doing. Not quite sure yet. We might do another yeasted dough. Maybe we'll do brioche just to even things out a little bit. We'll do a basic white bread maybe. With that, bon appetit. Thank you so much for joining me. I had a great time with you guys. Make sure to check out our website. We just launched our new website, bryonsbakery.net. A lot of pictures, some information on there. Contact information if you'd like to order anything. If you want to order a chocolate babka, absolutely. Give me a couple days notice and I'll be happy to make one for you. So go ahead, check us out online, bryonsbakery.net. Hope you enjoyed chocolate babka. Bon appetit. We are out. See you later. I'm going to finish this babka here.